Welcome back to another episode of Tyra Talks Truth, where real issues meet real conversations and nothing is left off the table. Good evening and welcome to another episode of Tyra Talks Truth. This time around on episode 2, we're going to talk about the Tourism Levy Amendment Bill, which was recently debated in the House of Parliament and to which the Leader of Opposition had some quite interesting things to say. But first, let's take a look at the bill. So the bill was introduced by the Honourable Member of Christchurch East Central, Mr. Ryan Strachan, Member of Parliament, and who is the Minister in the Ministry of Finance. How does it work? Well, persons with Airbnbs, guest houses, apartments, vacation rentals, etc. will need to register with the Barbados Revenue Authority so that they can collect levy from guests and remit it directly to the Barbados Revenue Authority. At the same time, they transfer the funds to the host in Barbados. Basically, the bill, what it's supposed to do is make it easier for the government to collect taxes on tourist accommodations through the Barbados Revenue Authority. It is not an implementation of a new tax like the Leader of Opposition would have you to believe. In fact, the tax was introduced July 1st, 2018, which, as we know, was when Mr. Thorne was a member of the Barbados Labour Party and a member of the government as the sitting MP of Christchurch South. So it's interesting to see now that a few years later, and because he has crossed the floor, he has so many things to say. Now, when we take a look at the bill itself, we would see that it targets tourists and the tourism sector, which we know is the leading economic sector right now in Barbados. And some important points to note is that at Section 10A, it says that facilitators, so the Airbnb, the Expedia.com, the Booking.coms, they have to advertise the tax when they're advertising the room rates. So in other words, it has to be disclosed. It can't be secret. And if it is not disclosed, you are guilty of a fine under Section 10A, subsection 7, and liable under summary conviction to $10,000. Now, if we look at the first and second schedules of this said bill, which was formerly the third and fourth schedules, we would note that the product development levy tax is still at 2.5% and the shared economy levy is at 10%. Once again, this is not a new tax. What is merely new is the fact in which it's being collected. So this bill really and truly will authorize the government, or rather the Barbados Revenue Authority on behalf of the government, to directly take the tax from when visitors book their stay. So, for example, if you have an Airbnb accommodation and you're charging $100 per night, the tourist or the visitor or the guest will now have to pay $110 per night rather than the $100. The $100 still goes to you and the 10% now goes to the government by way of the Barbados Revenue Authority. So simply put, it is not a burden on you, the person who has the accommodation, but rather a burden on the tourist, the guest, or the visitor. Ralph Thorne said multiple times during the debate that it's another tax, it's another levy. We're imposing new taxes on poor people. He said this throughout the debate.
But by today's activity, the government intends to collect more money from people. That is what they're intending to do. If you're going to make the system more efficient, it means, that word efficiency means that you want more than ordinarily you expect to receive. And that is why I'm saying it is an additional burden on people in this country who cannot afford to pay any more taxes.
He was corrected several times that this is not in fact a new tax. It is simply just the way it is being administered that has changed. Now, he accused the Honourable Member of Christchurch East Central, stating that he wasn't ready.
I just sought to commiserate with the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central who was not ready.
But who really wasn't ready?
Well, I'm still trying to understand what is going on here, but you will permit me to press on, sir.
Continue and try
Thank
not
you,
to
sir.
continue to mislead the house, sir.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Another thing to note is that Ralph Thorne consistently says he doesn't like the term small man, but then goes on to use it several times.
What is this government's mission in relation to, I hate to use the word, I'm not going to say small people, working class people.
The same government at the same time affirms a system of taxation against small people. I'm not going to make that point for the 5th time, but I've made it 4 times so that the people of Barbados understand. So that the people of Barbados understand their human condition, a human condition that is imposed by unfair, biased, and prejudicial treatment of small people by this government.
He's just full of contradictions, if you ask me. Then he changes his arguments. Remember, first his argument was that it was a new tax. And after being corrected 1,000 times, he then posits the argument that it is not a new tax per se, but because it's being implemented on the guests, that by extension, the hosts are also being burdened because it will make the accommodation more expensive and therefore your accommodation less attractive.
Is an additional cost to the guests, and it therefore the disadvantage extends to the hosts. Now, the Honourable Member for Christchurch West well understands that concept.
If it is that this tax is being applied broadly, does it not mean that your competitiveness in the market remains the same? Because everyone will have to do this, not just some people. So therefore, everyone's rates will increase. So this argument really isn't logical. What we should really find out is, did Mr. Ralph Thorne have any objections to when this levy was first implemented back in 2018? No. In fact, it's alleged that he supported it. So what's the big deal now? He also goes on to say that the economy is a borrowing economy. But if it is that the economy is a borrowing economy, should he not be grateful that the government is finding alternatives, especially alternatives that do not directly affect the citizens of Barbados? When we look at some of the benefits of taxes, you will note that taxes provide funding for essential public services, for example, healthcare, education, policing, roads, and sanitation. It allows the government to build and maintain infrastructures that support businesses, tourism, and economic growth. And it supports social welfare programs for the elderly, the unemployed, the disabled, and the vulnerable. It also promotes national financial independence and reduces reliance on foreign aid and borrowing. He should be pleased to hear that the government is finding alternative solutions. We know that lots of roads have been recently refurbished. We also know that urban is going through improvements and refurbishments to certain persons' homes. So at the end of the day, if we're doing all these things and we also are still relying on welfare, a lot of those families which belong to the One Family program, they are obviously dependent and reliant on welfare programs. Where do you think this money is going to come from? So in this scenario, I would say that the taxation isn't that bad because at the end of the day, my issue was never really with taxes, but what is done with those taxes. So as long as the government can show that our taxes are being used for good and know that the levy is being implemented will go towards something good for the citizens of Barbados, then I am most definitely pleased. What I will say is that the honorable member for Christchurch East Central did give us some figures in terms of what numbers these taxes have done. He says from the period of 2021 to 2022, the levy's taxes collected $9.63 million. And as we know, this was freshly after COVID. He said the period of 2022 to 2023, the levies collected $25.41 million. 2023 to 2024, $41.4 million. 24 to 25, $42.58 million. And so far for the period of 25 to 26, they have collected that is $15.92 million. So far, the trajectory has been upwards, but we'll see if this continues to be upwards. Now, usually I would say disadvantages of taxes is that it places a burden, obviously, on the citizens. But here, in this particular scenario, the burden is not on the host. It is on the visitor or the guest. And this needs to be made clear. So when Ralph Thorne loves to accuse this government of being a partying government, and we loves to jump, it seems Mr. Thorne loves to jump to conclusions. Now, we haven't heard Richard Seeley, who is the Democratic Labour Party's spokesperson on tourism, say anything about this. So I'm wondering if he has anything to say. Does he agree with Mr. Thorne or does he disagree? Maybe we'll never know, as he's been very silent in these recent days. Do you think that this tax is as bad as Mr. Thorne makes it seem, or do you think that this is actually a right move by the government? Let me know. I await your comments in the comment section. Thank you again for joining me this week, and I hope to see you again on Thursday.